Hello and welcome to the Blue Open Studio tutorial video series. The topic of this video will be email. In this video, we'll be discussing how the email feature works, properties of the email feature, and the built-in functions used with the email feature. And then we'll demonstrate configuring the email feature and sending an email. In the software, some features such as alarms and certain functions are able to send emails to designated recipients. And we can configure default settings that are automatically loaded when the project starts up and then can also be restored as needed during runtime. These settings can also be configured at runtime by calling the CNF email function. And emails can be sent via the supported features or by using the built-in functions. In order to use the email feature in our training application, we will have to do three things. The first will be to set up our tags. The second will be to configure the email feature, and the third will be to create the screens. So the first thing that we'll do is we will create our tags. And we are going to create a class that will be used for the email screen. So the first thing that I'll do in the development software, I'll go to the Global tab on the Project Explorer, and I will right-click on Classes and select Insert Class, and I'll create a new class called Email. And now what we can do is we can type in our member names and then configure their data types, or we can copy them in from an external file. And that's what we're going to do. So if we open Windows Explorer and we navigate to our training files, and mine is located on my C drive, if we look, we'll find a text file called emailclass.txt. We open that up, we have all of our classes here, and I will select everything and copy. And then back in development, I'll make sure that the first column and the first row is selected, and then I will simply paste them in. And then we'll paste in all of my member names and their data types and available descriptions. Once that's complete, I will close my new class. And then back on the Global tab, I will expand project tags and double click on Datasheet view. And then I will create a new tag called email. And then I will set the data type or type for this tag from integer to our new class email. Once we have that configured, we are now able to proceed with the email configuration. So I'll close my tag list. And to get to our email settings, we go up to the menu ribbon, make sure that we're on the project tab, and then click on email/FTP. And that will bring up our email and FTP configuration dialog. And what we have to set up here is the outgoing mail server information, the send address, our server address, port number, and an available timeout. And if we require authentication, we enter it in at the second group. At the bottom are tags to indicate the status of an email send or a configuration load, and then also the trigger to reload the configuration at runtime. So we could put all tags inside of these and actually dynamically set these values at runtime. We will look at that later on in the video, but for now we're going to enter in static values. So I'll first enter in my send address. And then I'll enter in my server. In this case, I'm going to be using Gmail. So these are going to be the normal settings if you're going to be using a Gmail account. And Gmail requires authentication, so I will check the box for my server requires authentication. And then also we need to enable SSL. And when we do that, it comes up with a message that says to send email using SSL, you need to have CDO installed. Essentially what this message is telling us that there is a component that typically is installed with most modern versions of Windows. However, if you're using an embedded version of Windows or Windows CE, that may not be available or installed. So you want to check first. My recommendation is to check to see what version of Windows you will be running on your target system. If it's a standard version of Windows, you shouldn't have any issues. If it's an embedded or CE version of Windows, then you may want to test it to see if in fact it will work. If it doesn't, then the CDO component may need to be installed. And then I'll enter in my username and password. Once I have that done, there is this runtime section, and in here I'll put in 2 tags. The first one for status will be email.status, and then for reload, it will be email.reload. Now you can type them in manually, or you can right click and select insert tag, and then select your tag from there. And then finally, we have this button down here that will allow us to test our settings. So if I click on that, it brings up another dialog for testing the email. I can enter an recipient address. I'll enter in the recipient address, and then I'll click send email. You see that we have a status. It started to send, it was sending, and there was an email, and check your configuration. Now normally this means that either our server address, port number, or authentication information is incorrect. However, with Gmail, there is an additional setting that you have to configure in order to use a Gmail account with Blue Open Studio, and that has to do with security. So what I will do here is I will bring up my Gmail account, and then once you're inside Gmail, you want to go into your Google account settings, which can normally be accessed from this icon in the upper right. And once you're in your Google account settings, you'll want to go to security. And then from security, if you scroll down, you'll see a section called less secure apps. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to turn this on. So you want to click turn on access, and then just click the slider to enable it. And then that's it. We don't have to do a save or apply. That's because it automatically does that. So now once I go back into Gmail, you see that there's a critical security alert, and it says that access for less secure apps has been turned on. So that's just an indicator to tell us, yes, we have now enabled it. I will delete that message and then go back into development. So back in here, I'll try to send again. You see that it started to send. It was sending, and then it was sent successfully. So if I bring back up my Gmail, see now that I have a new message that says email and FTP configuration testing, and it's from me. So I have tested my settings, everything is configured properly, and I'm able to send emails. So I'll delete that and go back in. Once we have this configured, I will click OK. And now all we need left is our screen in order to allow us to send an email. So normally what we would do is we'd go into our graphics tab on the workspace, create a new screen, and then configure the objects on the screen. For this, we're going to go a different route, and we're actually going to copy the screens out of our training files folder. So what I'm going to do is close Blue Open Studio. I'm going to open Windows Explorer, snap that to the left side of my screen, open another Explorer window and snap it to the right. And then on the left side, I'm going to go to my application folder, which is on my C drive, and then into the screen subfolder. Then on the right side, I'm going to navigate to my training files, and then into the screen folder from there. We'll see several files in here, but we only need 3, and those are the ones that are labeled email. And the 3 are email.scc, email.tag, and email.txt. These 3 files are what is needed in order for the screen to be created automatically. And what they are is the SCC is the graphics, the actual layout of the screen. The tag file is the list of tags that are being referenced or used inside of the screen. And the TXT file is list of any text or strings that are labels or captions in the file. And these 2 are used for cross-references and searches, which we go over in our testing and debugging video. But I will just simply copy these into my application screen folder. And then I will Close them both and then bring up Blue Open Studio. Once that's up, I will go to my Graphics tab on the Project Explorer and expand Screens. And now we see that we have an email screen in our screen list. So before we dig into our screen, I will first bring up our Navigation to screen to add in the button to get to this. So I'll just copy my script button, and then go in and then change the open screen from script to email. And then on the caption, I will change that to email as well. Once that's done, I'll close my navigation screen, saving it as I do, and then I'll open my email screen. And in here we have several text boxes and buttons that are already pre-configured for us. At the top, we have our configuration section. So this is the same stuff that we just entered in through that email dialog box. So we have our sender, our SMTP and POP3 servers and ports, our timeout, and our authentication username and password. And then a button that will load this configuration in at runtime. Right now, this cannot be used because we have the email configuration set up with static values and not tags. In a little bit, we'll show you how to configure the email settings to use tags so we can dynamically change these at runtime. And then down below, we have our email composition section, our recipients field, carbon copy, blind carbon copy, subject, and message boxes. And then a list box that will list any files that we have selected to attach to the email we're going to send, and then buttons for attaching and clearing selected files, and then actually sending the email. So before we dig into the code behind these buttons, I will first bring up the tech reference so we can look at the functions. Once the tech ref comes up, I will simply search for email. And we see we have several items. And what we want to look for is email functions. And in here we have just 4 functions. CNF email, which is the configuration function. Then send email and send email ext, which will allow us to send an email either with or without attachments. And then get the status of a sent email, specifically the email ext function. So the first one we'll look at is the send email. And in here, this is a function set up very similar to others. If you are unfamiliar with our functions, I suggest you take a look at the scripting tutorial video that we have. It covers the layout of how functions are set up and how the tech reference describes them. So for this function, we really only have 3 parameters that we have to send to it: the subject, the message, and the recipient or the to address. And with this, we'll get one of several return values. 0 being successful. Anything non-zero means that there is a error in sending the email and the message was not sent. And then our examples, we can use just strings of text and put them inside of double quotes for all the parameters, or we can use tags to store the values that we're going to send as well. So the next one we want to look at is the send email ext function. And there's a nice shortcut here in the notes of the send email function that will take us there. And in here, it's very similar, although we have more parameters that we need to configure. We have our subject, our message, and our to, just like we did in the previous, but then we also have our carbon copy and blind carbon copy optional parameters, and then our optional parameters for files. And then once again, returned values. 0 being that it was successful. Anything else means that there was an error and that the email was not sent. So before we move on, one note here that I want to mention is the second line here that says that send email cannot be used when encryption via TLS SSL is enabled, nor to send any email that contains Unicode characters. Essentially what this means is that if we enable encryption, especially SSL, which most modern email servers require, we cannot use this send email function, and we have to use the send email ext function instead. Now we can use this even if we don't have any attachments that we're going to send along. So if you are testing this with, for example, Gmail, and it is just not working, it could most likely be because the send email function cannot be used with Gmail because Gmail requires SSL and authentication. So I'll click on send email ext function, and here we have a similar layout to what we've just seen. We have our parameters for subject message and our recipients, but then we also have additional parameters for our carbon copy and blind carbon copy recipients, and then the list of files, including the full path and extension for the files that we want to attach to the email. And as before, we'll get one of a few return values, 0 being successful, anything else means there was an error, and that the email did not send. And then again, some examples. The big note here is when you want to attach files, they have to be separated with a comma and then inside of double quotes. As you see in this example here, it gives us a Word doc. If I wanted to add another one, it would be exactly this just after it. So another comma, and then inside of double quotes, the full path and file name and extension of the second file. So we don't encapsulate the entire list of files in double quotes. Each individual file and path is encapsulated inside of double quotes. And I'll show you that when we actually get to this portion of the email feature. So I will go back into development, and then we'll look at the send email button. And I will bring it up and open config. And as I do, it tells me that file attachment does not exist. Would you like to create this tag? And yes, we have to create another tag. So I'll click yes, and this one is actually going to be an array. And I'm going to set the array number to 4, which means we have a total of 5 elements, 0 through 4. And the type will be string. And then I'll click OK. And then I'll open up my large configuration window. And we see here that we have several lines of code just to send an email. That's because of the email attachments. As I mentioned, each individual file has to be encapsulated inside of double quotes and separated by a comma. So what we have to do is we have to check first to see how many email attachments that we have, and then we run through this to tell us what function specifically to use. As you can see, this is a case statement, and a case statement is just like an if statement, only with more conditions that could be met. So what we're saying is that for this case statement, we want to look at this tag for its value. And this is an integer tag, so we know that the values will be from 0 to 5. So 0 mean no attachments. We just simply send out the email with our configured subject line, message body, the recipient, and the CC and BCC recipients. If there's one attachment, we have all of the above and then our first file. If there's 2 attachments, we have all of the above, the first file, comma, the second file. So now you see where that real limitation comes in for the function. We have to separate each file, and that being the full path, the file name, and the extension by commas. So it actually looks like we have more than the 6 parameters. It looks like we have 7, but in fact, all that this is an extension or an addition onto the last parameter. And then it moves on from there. So for 3 attachments, we see 4 and 5. And then down at the bottom, we interrogate the result of the send email ext function, and then whether or not it succeeded or it failed, we will pop up a message box that gives us the appropriate message. So if the result is 0, meaning that the email was sent successfully, we have a successful message, and then our buttons for the message box is the OK only and the information icon, and then the title. If it's anything else, meaning there was an error, then we have an error sent in the email, and then we give it the error code, and then our button and icon, and then our title. And then at the very bottom is the message box function with the message, button, and title that we've configured up in the if condition. Okay, so I will close this, and then we'll look at the attach file. And in this button, what we have is we are using the rdfileend function, which we go over in the scripting tutorial video. So I highly recommend reviewing that video if you want to get more details about how this function works. But essentially what it does is it brings up a file browser, allows us to pick a file, and then it will bring in the path and the file name. So we bring that in, and then we put that full path and file name into one of the file attachment array elements. And we dynamically set it. And then below that, what we are doing is we are trimming out the file path, and we are simply listing the file name with extension in our list box so we can see how many files and what they are that we've selected for attachments. And then we increment our file count, and this is the file that's used for that case statement in the send email button. And then we clear out a temp tag, and then below we will disable this button if the file count is greater than or equal to 5, meaning that we've reached the maximum number of attachments we want to use. And this is an artificial limitation that I've put in. We could do an unlimited number. However, if we did that, that case statement has to grow each time because of how the function is set up. And then the clear selected files button, all that this one does is just clears out those two tags. So the files that we have selected and the file count, and then it clears out the file attachment array. So once we have that set up and we have everything configured, I will close this screen, and it asks me if I want to save, and I will. And then I will start up my runtime. Once I do that, I will come back to development, snap that to the left, snap my runtime to the right. And then on my main screen here on navigation, I'll click on my arrows to bring up my second navigation. I'll go to email. And you see now that it comes up with our email screen. And in here, I can come to recipients. When I click on it, that alphanumeric keyboard that we configured in a previous video comes up, and I will type in my recipient. And then I will tab. And you see as I tab, it doesn't bring me to the next one, which we will look at in a little bit here. But you see as I'm tabbing, I'm going all over the place. And how the tab order is set up by default is it's the order in which the objects are placed on the screen. And I'll show you how to correct that here in a minute. So I'll go to the next one I want, and I'll skip CC and BCC for now and go to subject. And I'll just simply type in test. And then in the message body, type in test. And then I will click on send email. And it comes up with a little note that says email sent successfully. And this is what we were talking about when we looked at the buttons and we saw VB OK only plus VB information. What we mean is we only want the OK button to be displayed on the pop-up, and the information is that little blue icon with the letter I in it. I'll click OK. And to verify, I will go to my Gmail account, and then I will refresh. And there we go. We get an email, and if I come into it, we see that it says subject line test and message body is test. Delete it and then go back into my project. Then if I wanted to send one with an attachment, I can click on attach file, and it'll bring up the file browser, and you see that we start in the application directory. And I'm just going to pick something simple. I will pick this bosds.pdf file and click open, and you see that it lists it here. However, if we come over to our database spy, and down at the bottom here, if we enter in a new tag, and for this I will want email attachment, we see that it is empty because of course it is, because it's cleared out at the end of our function or of our script in the button. So I'll add in another one, which will be a project tag, and it's going to be file attachment. And since this is the first one, I'll select index or element 0. And we now see the full path, the file name, and the extension for the file that is going to be attached. I will copy that, paste it here, and then change the element from 0 to 1, then come back over here and select another file. And in this case, I'll just select the breakpoint.txt file. You see here that it gives me, once again, the full path, file name, and extension. Only here we see that we just have the file and extension listed. That's because of that trim function that we're using in this button. And then I will change the subject line just to say test number 2, and then click send email. And it says email sent successfully. So once again, go back into my Gmail account. Now we'll refresh. And we now see we have another email, this time with 2 attachments. So we have now looked at how to send an email using the basic functions. Now what we will do is we will modify our email configuration to use tags so we can dynamically change our email server, our username and password, or even the send address dynamically at runtime. And to do this, we first have to make sure the runtime is stopped because we are going to be modifying project or application settings that cannot be modified at runtime. So I have stopped the runtime, and I will go back up to the menu ribbon, go to project, then click on email/FTP. And then the email and FTP configuration, we can enter in our tags. So the first thing we'll do is we will change the email from, and we will enter in our tags inside of curly brackets. So for the from address will be email.sender. And then for the server will be email.smtp. For port, it will be email.smtp port. And timeout, email.timeout. And then for authentication, we will change this to be email.username. And we will get this message, and you may get it the first time that you configure it, and it's about data protection. It's essentially saying that data protection is disabled, which means that sensitive information such as usernames and passwords will not be encrypted. Basically, it just says that our data protection is turned off, so your information could be less secure than it should be, and people may be able to find out or detect what it is. Do you want to proceed with settings that aren't recommended? And I will click yes, just to click through it. And then for the password, will once again be email.password. And now, unfortunately, we can't test because we don't have anything here. We have tags that are configured dynamically at runtime. So what I recommend doing is first testing to see if you can communicate or use an email account that you know by putting in the static values like we did previously. And then once you know it works, then change these over to tags. So once we have this set up, I'll click OK. And then we want to look at the email screen, because the one thing we didn't look at is the email configuration button. So if I bring that up, and I will expand it so we can see everything, we see there's very little code here that needs to be done. Essentially, all we need to do is run that CNF email function and pass along the parameters. Now, 2 important things about this is that when we use the CNF email function, it's recommended to send along the port along with the server address. So for example, SMTP, we see that we have our SMTP address here, then a colon, and then the SMTP port number. That's required. However, when you use this function, you also have to send the POP3 information if you have security or authentication enabled. So for that, it's the same thing. We give it the POP3 address, a colon, and then the port number. And then we see at the very back is a value of 2, and that is the authentication type. And there are 2 values that can be used for this, a 1 or a 2. One is unencrypted, or two is encrypted via TLS or SSL. So what we will do here, obviously, is we'll set a 2 because we need to use SSL with our Gmail account. And this information about this parameter can be found in the manual for the CNF email function. And then below that, we just display a message box similar to what we've seen before with the send email button that will interrogate the result of the function and then display the appropriate message. A 0, of course, being successful, and anything else means that there was an error loading the configuration. Okay, so our screen is configured. Yes, I'll save changes even though I didn't make any. And now I will start up the runtime. Once it comes up, I will snap it to the right, snap my development to the left, and then I will go to my email screen. And we see that we have our settings from the previous demonstration. And that's once again because even though we stop the runtime, that the tags database will still store the last used or last entered information. So we'd have to actually initialize the tags database, or much easier would be just simply to clear everything out. However, we are going to be using the same recipient and all of that. So the only thing I'll do is I'll click on the Clear Selected Files button to clear out any previously attached files. But before we can send the email, we have to configure our server information. So up here, I'll enter in a sender. And the SMTP server, which for Google, it's smtp.gmail.com. And then the port, for us, it will be 465. And then the username. And the password. And then last is the POP3 server and POP3 port. And the POP3 server, and if you don't know what these are, not only for the POP3 but also for SMTP, there's an easy way to find them. And you can actually get to them through your Gmail account. So I'll bring up Gmail. And then if I click on the gear over here on the right-hand side, we'll bring up the settings. And then I'll go to settings again. And then to forwarding and POP/IMAP. And what we can do here is we can find out the configuration instructions for both. So for example, for IMAP, if we click on configuration instructions, it'll bring up the help page for it. And we'll see right here our information that we need to use. For us, we used the outgoing SMTP server because we're not bringing any email in, we're simply sending it out. So that means that our server address is smtp.gmail.com, and there's our port for SSL. Requires authentication, yes. And then what our username and password will be. And then for POP3, we can do the same thing. Under the POP download, click on configuration instructions, and then we see the same thing. So the outgoing mail SMTP server is the same. The port will be 587. So what I will do is I'll come back in, and for the POP3 server, SMTP, .587, and then I will click on the button Load Configuration. And you see that it took a second. That's because it's loading that in and then actually restarting that portion of the application. And it says that the email configuration loaded successfully. And what I will do is I will simply send a test email. It says email sent successfully. So now I will toggle back over to my email, come back in to my inbox, and we see that we have a test number 2 with no attachments. the last thing we will look at is the tab order. As I stated earlier, if I am on a text box, for example, this one here for the recipients, and I tab, you see that I don't go to the next, which is the CC field. And that's because the tab order is determined by the order in which the objects are placed on the screen. So you see as I'm tabbing through, I'm going all over the place. So to change that, you would bring up your screen, and I will maximize this so we can see everything. And then we will right click on the screen, and in the context menu, click on tab order. And then we see these identifiers come up for each object on the screen and the order in which they are listed for the tabs. Now, a lot of these we won't actually be able to tab to. For example, the labels at runtime, we won't be able to tab to them, so it'll simply skip over that. But if we want to change these, for example, we want to start at the very top and be able to tab all the way down from top to bottom, left to right, all that we can do is we can either click on the item and we'll change it to the next number. So for example, this was the first click, so it was item 1. If I come over here and I click on this, it goes to 2. And then for the SMTP port, it goes to 3, and then so on. Now we can do it that way, but let's say, for example, I accidentally click on this and I go, crap, I don't want that to be 7, I want this to be 7. Well, now if I click on this, that becomes 8. If I click on it again, it becomes 9. What do I do? Well, it's simple. I would double click here, and it'll bring up a little input box, and I'll put in the number that I want. So I want this one to be 7. So that changes to 7, and then as I continue, it resumes counting. So we'll go through here, and I will simply just click on everything I want to be in the order that I want it to be. Okay, so now I have all of the input boxes and buttons in the tab order I want, and the rest won't matter anyway because the tab focus will not stop on those at runtime. So now I'll right click again on the screen and then click on tab order again to close it. I will save. And then I will snap my development back to the left. And now when I come in here, if I click on sender, and now as I tab through, you see that it is tabbing through with the order that I gave it. So now it would be much easier to actually cycle through and compose not only our configuration settings, but also our email itself. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact ProFace America Technical Support by phone at 1-800-289-9266, option 2, or by email, support@profaceamerica.com. You can also visit our website, profaceamerica.com, for drivers, manuals, FAQs, and other product and software information. Thanks again, and have a great day.